Do you believe in Jesus Christ? I think that is a good and compelling question to ask in our times as we look at today's gospel. And what does it mean for you to believe in Jesus Christ? I believe that he is the Son of God. How else would he be able to do all these healings that we read about, all the exorcisms, and all of the miracles throughout the Gospels? The disciples knew Jesus and believed in Jesus. Peter had spoken on behalf of all of them when he confessed Jesus to be the Christ. But how deep did their belief in him go? Well, let's check it out. When Jesus heard that Lazarus, his friend, was sick, he wasn't worried at all. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't panic. He knew what the outcome would be. So he waited a couple days before announcing to his disciples that they were going to go back to Judea to check in on his friends. And what was his disciples' response? They didn't want him to go back. Wait a minute, Jesus. It's really not safe at this moment to go out. The last time you were there, the Jews tried to stone you. Are you sure you know what you're doing? The disciples asked him. How far did their belief in him go? When he tells them that Lazarus has fallen asleep, they're thinking, of course, of a natural sleep, like he took a nap. They rationalize if he's sleeping, then he'll recover pretty soon, so there's no need to run back at all. But in fact, it isn't natural sleep that Jesus is talking about. It is the sleep of death. So Jesus finally tells them, in plain words, Lazarus is dead. Then he says what seems to be a strange thing. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. How could anyone be glad that a friend has died, you might ask? It sounds uncaring. It sounds cold and callous. What about the pain that Mary and Martha were feeling? Doesn't Jesus care about that? Or is it that all he cares about is making his point to his disciples? Well, it becomes quite clear as the story continues that he does care. He does care very much. Twice we're told how he was moved with emotion, moved with tears, as he sees the sadness of those who are mourning Lazarus. Jesus is not made out of stone. He's not some plaster statue. He weeps. He feels pain. He feels sadness. And yes, even today he feels our very pain. But still, he knows that there's more at issue here than their sadness and grief, because he knows what the outcome will be. He already said that this illness is not going to end in death. God will be glorified, and his disciples will be growing in their faith and their belief in Jesus Christ. And that's what makes him happy. That's what makes him grateful. You see, the disciples' belief in Jesus still needs to be strengthened a little bit, just as our faith needs to be strengthened this very morning. Their formation as disciples is not yet over, and neither is ours. They have not arrived yet, and neither have we. Even though they spent all of their time living and eating and playing with Jesus, they still didn't really understand who he was. And when the rubber hit the road, their faith was still not going to be enough to sustain them. They did not see him yet as the light of the world. And Jesus says about light, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of the world. But those who walk at night, my brothers and sisters, he said, the light is not in them, and they do stumble. Interestingly, those words are most identical to what Jesus said last week when he was talking about giving sight to the blind man. And St. John obviously intends us to look at the connection between the two stories, the healing of the blind man and the raising of his friend Lazarus. Here the implication is that while you walk under God's direction, while you remain close and tied to Jesus, who is the light of the world, your journey, my brothers and sisters, will be crystal clear. Even when the darkness of life, like today, is threatening, if you walk in the light, you'll be safe. And I guarantee, using Jesus' words, you will be okay. There still was a danger that the disciples would be so overwhelmed by the darkness around them that they would forget to walk in the light of Christ. Again, this is why they need to grow deeper and plant their roots deeper in faith. Now, Jesus has delayed his departure, you notice, so that by the time that they got to Lazarus, it would have been about 4 days that he was dead. That is, he'll be really dead. That is a mackerel, as they say. No question about it. Now imagine that you were Mary or Martha or his family at that moment. You sent a message to Jesus to come urgently because he was sick. And you wait and wait and wait and nothing happens. What must they have been thinking? What would they be wondering about Jesus? Did he care at all? Would you begin to doubt whether maybe Jesus was delaying because this case was too difficult for him? They could have been forgiven for thinking like that, couldn't they? Have you ever wondered why God takes so long to answer our prayers? I do. I do many, many times. What are you waiting for, God? Perhaps there are things you've been praying for weeks, for months, and even maybe for years. And still God seems to be delaying his answer a little bit. What does that do to your faith in him? Do you start to doubt? Do you ask yourself whether this prayer may be beyond him? Or whether you're asking for the wrong thing? Or maybe you start thinking that just praying is a waste of time. That in the end it's just going to be wishful thinking. Well, it could be that you've been asking the wrong thing or the wrong motives. James has something to say about this in James 4. But it might also be that God is waiting for something to happen, waiting for the time to be right, perhaps, for the time to be right, waiting for maybe an attitude to change, waiting for an opportunity to act that will further the gospel, that will bring the greatest glory to God. God's delays aren't signs of failures on his part. In fact, when you think about the story that we see throughout the Bible, the theme of God's plan being delayed runs right through it. And just at the last minute, he comes through, always. This week, as you go about your life, sequestered to home, most likely, a life that's been changed drastically for all of us, let's keep Jesus and his word as the lamp unto our feet so that we don't stumble in darkness. My brothers and my sisters, let your light be a candle also to others, that they may not curse the darkness at these times. My brothers and my sisters, while we have time, let us do good. Amen.